Welcome to Wisdom Talk Radio, a collaborative community of explorers in conscious living. Division, separation, judgment, other. Our airwaves are filled with these stories. And as most of you know, if you've been here with me at Wisdom Talk Radio before, I'm about another picture entirely. So what if you lived in a world where every unique individual expression was celebrated as part of humanity's glorious whole? My guest today is about creating just that. So if you're ready to move out of old patterns, old ways of thinking and being and doing, stay tuned. I'm Laurie Seymour, host of Wisdom Talk Radio and CEO and founder of the Baca Institute. Head there to discover your creative advantage by taking the Creative Innovator Quiz. Find out your personal creative innovator style so that you can open your creative flow and make everything in life easier. Learn to optimize your ability to create more in less time while enjoying every minute. So my guest today is Lola Wright, and I'm getting to meet her as you're getting to meet her, which is not always the case. And I'm really excited about that because, well, we get to discover together. Lola is a TEDx speaker. She's a coach. And she's host of Find Your Fierce and Loving podcast. In addition, she's an ordained minister with a gift for weaving together the mystical and material. And if that doesn't sound compelling and want you to, stick around, I don't know what would. Her work has taken her to stages around the world as a speaker and vocalist, including TEDx, Chicago Ideas, Harvard Divinity School, Agape International Spiritual Center, and Havana Jazz Festival. That's quite a listing, Lola. We already know, okay, you're a woman of great breadth. And I suspect
this is true
as well.
True indeed. Thanks for having me, Laurie. It's so good to be with you.
Oh, I'm delighted, Lola. Thank you. So, where do I want to begin with you? Well, because we think about, okay, how does our history impact how we are today? What was your upbringing and how did that impact the way that you feel about community? Because I know how important community is to you.
Yeah. I'm the oldest of 26 grandchildren. My mom's the oldest of 9 children. I come from a big Irish Catholic family that had a very devoted practice to social justice. And my mom left my dad for a woman in 1992, which was pretty scandalous. It wasn't met with open arms. And so I very quickly saw the way the Catholic Church that I was raised in responded to my mother. And oftentimes you'll hear people say I'm a recovering Catholic. That doesn't feel true for me at all. I actually had a very affirming Catholic upbringing, and I saw the limitations of the dogma when my mom came out.
Yes.
And so I began this quest for affirming community models that were what I would call radically inclusive and moved beyond dogma and doctrine. And that's what I continue to support and create in my own body of work. And it really, for people who have been sort of tossed out or mistreated by traditional organizational or religious frameworks, finding affirming spaces that they don't have to just squeeze into makes a really big difference. And as you mentioned, my TEDx talk was on the future of community in a post-religious society.
Ooh.
every religious tradition is in a kind of deconstruction of some sort. And so it really begs the question, what does community look like in the absence of traditional religion?
Or even with traditional religion, how could it look?
Absolutely.
So talk about that a little. What could that look like? What does it need to look like? And I say need from the perspective of being inclusive and not people into boxes.
Yeah, I am a practitioner of the mystical realm. And so I just have so much appreciation for the world's traditions. So for me, it is not the path of the mystic that is the problem. It's when we conflate our curiosity around the unseen realm with power and control and domination. That's where it sort of goes sideways, when it becomes about sort of bureaucracy and institutions versus the practice. And I think it is not an easy thing to create order and to create a system. We don't have a lot of recent or modern history on how to do that without power and control as the central force. So, I think part of what I work to do, both in the organizations that I consult with and the community that I've formed, is really moving beyond a kind of closed and defensive, scarcity-based model of leadership into one of curiosity, openness, really shifting from a fear-based paradigm to, more esoterically, we could say like a philosophy of oneness. And it's pretty interesting how you can bring those principles into the most traditional of spaces, even into corporate organizational settings. There's a way to have a conversation around conscious leadership that is very different than fear-based paradigms.
Yeah. I love how you've just described that, Lola, in so many ways. And I have about 6 questions that occur to me, based on that. Because you talk about conscious leadership, you talk about how we bring into that bigger dimension, the macrocosm, really, the macrocosm in the physical world of those more, we could say, esoteric principles, but those esoteric principles that have now been shown to be a reflection or an expression, if you will, of quantum physics.
Yes.
That we are all connected, that we're really talking about this unified field, and that what happens here has impact across the world, and on and on and on and on. So so how do you begin to have that conversation with, let's say, a corporation?
Yeah. Well, it's so fun because I recently, about a year ago, went through a whole sort of branding exercise with an agency. And one of the pieces of feedback I got was from a senior leader in Oprah's camp. And she said, Lola Wright is like the Eckhart Tolle of the streets. And what I loved about that was that it's really about making this stuff relatable.
Yes.
So if it feels too woo-woo or too nebulous, it's challenging for people who are very grounded in this material realm to access it. And so what I find is when I go into corporate settings or organizational settings, the more that I can use like layman's terms versus lingo, the people get this stuff. I mean, the principles that you and I are talking about that we could use very lofty language for is pretty basic in a lot of ways. You said it, like, hey, would you be willing to consider that whatever it is you're dealing with right where you are, I oftentimes call that on planet Laurie or on planet Lola. Would you be willing to consider that actually isn't happening in isolation? And we can look at things like science and see so clearly how that's true. People who may be more skeptical of the esoteric really appreciate the groundedness and the points of reference found in science. I have no problem with that.
Right,
What's beautiful about the time we're living in is, science, religion, and philosophy are intersecting in more and more ways. And what you and I have been talking about now for decades is becoming increasingly mainstream. That's exciting to me.
It's very exciting. Science is catching up.
Yes.
With what we've known forever, what the mystics have spoken about for thousands of years.
Yes.
And I remember a friend of mine who is a research scientist once saying a few decades ago, early on in the research that we were doing together, science doesn't yet have a way to measure what we have been experiencing in our physical bodies. And so now as science catches up, it sounds like you, Lola, are being one of those bridge builders to create that pathway from that linear three-dimensional model, shall we say, to this new way of thinking, this quantum thinking.
Yeah, I was raised by a mother who was doing Feldenkrais and Reiki and sprouted bread and macrobiotic diets. And she was taking us to all the retreats across the country, doing the most obscure practices.
Yes.
And as a result of that, I had deep resistance and cynicism and sort of a perpetual eye roll as a teenager and into very early adulthood. And then realized, holy smokes, this woman was really ahead of her time and such a gift to me. And I think what that gave me was like being really deep in, my grandparents were Rumi meditators. My grandfather studied with Thich Nhat Hanh and they lived on sacred land. And, all of this sort of gave me this really powerful foundation. But the gift of the cynicism was exactly what you said. I'm really here to be a bridge builder because the cynicism makes sense to me. I can appreciate the skepticism. I can appreciate wanting more evidence,
And to being able to not have to say, we want to let go of that rational, logical part of ourselves. That's not what's really meant either. And it's certainly not what's needed. It's that we have to bring that into some kind of connection with that which we haven't been able to see or measure to some extent can.
Yes.
So what would community look like? That's that kind of follow-up question. In this new kind of world where membership in traditional religions is plummeting. People aren't saying that they don't believe, but that they're not attached to a particular body of like-minded thinkers.
Yes.
Really in traditional religion.
Well, I think one of the ingredients that does not work anymore is obligation. So how do you create a community that is about commitment versus obligation? What I know to be true is that when we move from obligation, we create resentment. And when resentment ensues, we produce entitlement. So to form a community out of obligation has a short lifespan and produces a pretty toxic culture. So how do you create a community out of commitments and agreements? The way that I think of the term commitment is the way in which I organize my energy. Can we create shared commitment, an interest and a willingness to organize our energy in a particular direction? Great. And then the realm of agreements. Who's going to do what by when? Relational drama comes from unaligned commitments and unmet agreements. Most human beings are moving on the planet without aligned commitments. You can see this in marriages, in business partnerships, in family systems. So we actually don't have agreement around how and where we are organizing our energy. And then we don't make any real clear agreements who's going to do what by when. We make assumptions, and then we have drama. And so I just think like there's just the more clear we can be at the onset. So I created a community that has, a monthly membership subscription, and it's really clear. Here's what I'm committed to contributing, and here's what I'm asking you to contribute. As opposed to the traditional church model where I say as an ordained minister, it is your duty, your moral obligation, your responsibility to underwrite this community. I just don't think that works anymore. I'd love it if human beings felt compelled to financially contribute out of the goodness of their heart, but I don't think we can undermine the implications of capitalism in our psychology. And so it is, sort of the old traditional framework of tithing. I believe in it. I practice it. I have had incredible demonstrations in my life through the active practice of financial contribution and generosity. But I will tell you, having taught those principles for many, many years, I don't think that that's where the consciousness of humanity is right now. And I am not interested in swimming upstream around that topic.
Okay. Does that connect at all or relate at all to sacred economy and the way of supporting other people's dreams?
Yeah, well, and I think I think about conscious capitalism, how is it possible to create a reciprocal relationship in an economy, that is balanced and in harmony? What we're living in right now is hyper-capitalism, which is why we have sort of a diseased state. Eckhart Tolle would say we're in an evolutionary leap where we're amidst a radical crisis. And when you are amidst a radical crisis, either extinction occurs or we go through an evolutionary leap. And so that's so I just want to keep asking the question, how could it be possible from an abundance mindset that we could create an experience in this dimension of reality where we collectively prosper? Is that possible? I believe it is.
Yeah. Collectively prosper.
Yes. Yeah.
As
opposed to, I got to get mine, and I'm going to hoard, and I'm going to kill off, metaphorically, I'm going to kill off any threat, So when we are in a deeply unconscious state, we're organizing ourselves around scarcity. I got to hoard. So I think that as we go through this evolutionary leap, as we awaken to what I believe to be the absolute truth, and I think we could again look to nature to verify this, there is more than enough. Lynn Twist says in her book, The Soul of Money, we do not have a sufficiency problem. We have a distribution problem. And we have a distribution problem because we live inside of a paradigm that there is not enough. But it's actually not true. There's more than enough if we could create a sense of equanimity in our systems and structures that honored the natural giving and receiving of this universe.
So you're talking from that big picture of how things can look, and and then at the very base of that is the personal experience of if you Lola have, it doesn't mean that me, Laurie, that I don't have.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that I can't have. And that's so much of what's motivating a lot of what we're witnessing right now in the world.
Yes. And what I know to be true, having led a very dynamic community in Chicago for 7 years, is that, people's scarcity consciousness is not correlated to net worth. I have worked with some of the wealthiest human beings that are deeply, deeply mobilized and paralyzed by scarcity. So wherever we are in our balance sheet, our cash flow analysis, our net worth statement, that's not necessarily an indicator of if I am run by scarcity or resting in abundance, you know?
So fear or love?
Yes, exactly. And from a community perspective, you know, and we don't even have enough time to talk about how we got here, but so many religious organizations are in a kind of poverty consciousness, you know, sort of desperately leaning on the generosity of community members to hopefully, you know, give. And I just got sort of tired of that game and wasn't seeing that it was working. I know too many ministers who are secretly struggling and talking about abundance and prosperity, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, and I see that same thing, frankly, with conscious practitioners of all sorts. You know, that feeling of scarcity mentality, scarcity thinking. I don't have enough. Look, it's true. Look at my bank balance. It's true. I don't have enough.
Yes.
And so therefore, since the energies respond that way, I mean, the universe responds that way. Oh, okay. You don't have enough.
That's right.
Hear that you don't have enough. Yes, indeed. We will agree with you.
That's right.
So can you talk a little bit about how shifting that shifts everything?
Yeah. Well, I was 20 years old. I was the mother of 2 little kids. I became pregnant when I was 18, had my first child when I was 19. So I guess 21. I had 2 little kids. It was a very volatile situation that I was in. And I found myself in this kind of perpetual loop of scarcity. And I would obsessively look at my online bank account as if that was going to do something, you know? And as I began to familiarize myself with this notion of abundance consciousness, like that was a sort of revolutionary idea. And I remember some of my early teachers saying, you know, Lola, you know, you really just got to move into this knowing that you are abundant. It is the nature of your life. That was too big a leap for me.
Right.
Given where I was, you know, obsessively watching an overdrawn checking account, feeling mounting student loan debt, you know, working tirelessly and never being able to sort of make ends meet. It was too big a leap to go from that to I am abundant.
Yeah.
You know,
needed a bridge. You needed the bridge.
Exactly.
So that's why you're such a good bridge builder, is because you know that other side.
That's right.
And you've traversed that pathway.
That's right. Yeah. And so what I started doing was I would look at my online bank account, whatever the number was, positive, negative, big and, you know, lavish, or really, really down and dirty. And I just would look at it and say, this is not the truth. You know, like that I could get to. It was like, whatever the number is, that's not the truth of who I am. It's just a representation of something. So if I can incrementally get through that, because previously it had me, and this is what I see independent of people's net worth, a sense of identity being formed by whatever that number is. So I had to sort of unlock from that. Okay, whatever the number is, that's not who I am. Okay, great. Can you be with that? Can you get with that? Okay, so if that's not who I am, then who and what am I? Then what's actually true about me? You know, so you sort of got to back into it. And it's like, okay, so I'm learning that this is an abundant universe, that actually it's a delusion that there are scarce resources. Okay.
Let me insert something real quick.
Please.
And I don't want to break your train of thought, but
No.
It occurs to me that one of the ways that mindset got created was out of that need for, or that feeling of a need for control by those systems, you know, initially those religious systems, that in order to to do what they felt they needed to do. We have to have control. We have to be the intermediary. We have to essentially paint a picture of scarcity that only we can fill.
Yes,
That makes
that's
sense.
right. Yes. I mean, that is theologically accurate. I mean, if you think about even the concept of original sin, it was formed around the French Revolution, and it was governmentally created to create a sense of control and domination among the people. So if you could have the people believe that there's something fundamentally wrong with them, then they have to outsource their power, authority, safety, and security to the organizing body. But much more ancient than original sin is original blessing, is more of a creationist spirituality, that actually there is something whole and holy about you, that you are this infinite, glorious portal for the divine to express through. And so as we start to, put all of that together, it begins to make sense. We're coming out of an age of suffering. We're quite literally shifting in consciousness. And if we look at just what's happened in the last several years, our politics have not been this toxic in a very long time. And we have just, navigated over a year of a global pandemic. There are so many economic indicators that are indicating a deconstruction is occurring. And we can look at all of that and say, this is a problem. Or we could go, this is very good news. We are evolving.
Yeah. So say something about what you mean by deconstruction, just so our listeners can have a better sense of that.
Yeah, so I think that we're noticing, for example, I have 4 kids, 2 of whom went through remote learning. And at the beginning of the global pandemic, the school district was in a state of crisis. All of a sudden, there was something that they were faced with that they didn't have a context and a know-how to respond. Over the course of the year, I have seen the literal nervous system of the district relax a little bit. When we are in crisis, acute crisis, it's very difficult to come up with creative solutions.
It's impossible, really.
Right. So as we settle in, okay, so this all went on much longer than we anticipated. So now some spaciousness is being created for imagination and innovation. And how could the school district begin to do education in new and interesting ways? I mean, I've just watched my kids' teachers, some of whom were real technophobes. And now they were brought to their knees in this past year, and they had to move through that. Yeah. So I think that, we're going to have, the odds statistically, there doesn't really seem like there's going to be an obvious, unless there's a massive wave of student loan forgiveness, that is predicted to be the next economic crisis. And so all of these are indicators that the way we've been organizing our society isn't working as well as it could. And we can look at all of our lives and say, wow, the breakdown has consistently preceded the breakthrough. And when you're in the breakdown, it is super uncomfortable. You wouldn't wish it on anyone. But we all can also look at our lives and go, and I now understand the lessons and the evolution and the expansion that I got out of that. So that's what I think we're really living in. And it's uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable. It's the same kind of discomfort as when you're personally going through great change and something has ended, whether that be in your physical world, a marriage, a job, it could be a way of thinking, or it could just be a project you've been working on. And then you're not sure what's going to happen next.
Yes.
And then you're in that void, what I speak about as the void. And it's that creative empty space that is so uncomfortable that you want to fill it. You want to structure it. You want to put something around it and say, okay, that's what it is. You might even say, oh, I'm coming down with something, this feeling of malaise. When really it's that space that we as collectively, as a species, have to get better at being able to, I want to say tolerate, but it's much more than that. Like
navigate
is what it is. Certainly navigate, but even welcome. Like,
yes.
Oh, that's what this is. When I can name that feeling in me as, oh, I'm going through change. Oh, I'm in the void. Then that
yes.
feeling of wanting to burst into tears at least has some sense of space that I've created around it.
My husband's a landscape architect, and there's a principle in landscape architecture called winter interest.
Ooh.
And what that means is that he designs with the winter in mind. So the time that people are most compelled by landscape is usually the spring and summer and maybe the fall.
Mm-hmm.
So he, many years ago, he did a big installation at a client's house, and he drove by over the weekend early in the winter to see how was the winter interest coming along.
Mm-hmm.
And as he drove up, he saw their maintenance company plowing down all of the dried perennials.
Oh, no.
And he was like, ah! And what he came to realize is, I didn't explain to the client and their maintenance company that the deadening of the perennials is not a problem.
Right.
It's actually a beautiful process. And now, we have a side yard that's filled with hydrangea that are beautifully dried in the winter.
Right.
And that is the winter interest. So, it's such a great metaphor, because when we realize that there is just as much beauty in the darkness. This is part of this shift also. Historically, we've related to the darkness as evil, as bad, when really it's just a misunderstanding of the mystery.
Exactly.
It's like in the dark.
The rest of it.
That's right. It's where birth is occurring. It's where gestation is forming. The rich, dark soil is where all the mystery resides. So I think it's just part of our maturation as a species, to your point.
Yeah. And as you say that, I'm flashing on even, I don't remember which century it was that we believed that the sun revolved around us.
Yes.
And, Copernicus and Galileo and others, kind of got into the mix and said, not exactly. That how do we shift out of those old paradigms? It's always when we come to that point where there's that moment of, okay, this really isn't working anymore.
Yes.
And we're forced to it. Unfortunately, it takes that being forced to it, which in some ways is what the pandemic has offered to so many people. Is that push into what's possible. Looking at that.
Yeah, you often use birth as a metaphor, having labored and delivered through, 4 babies.
Right.
A woman's body, or a birthing person's body, dilates to 10 centimeters. And, centimeters 7 to 10 are called transition. They are thought of as the most acute time in the laboring process. It is typically the time where a birthing person is like, I'm over this. I cannot do this one more moment. But important to right. But important to realize it is typically the shortest period of the laboring process. It's the most acute, but it is also the shortest. And so that is, I think of this time in human evolution as transition of birth.
Yes. Yeah. And what are we giving birth to? It's why I am so committed to working with the whole process of inspiration and innovation and creation and co-creation.
Yes.
Because what we're here to do is to co-create. Only we have to... in a way, we have to open to what's possible in order to do that, because then we're opening to those unseen forces that can inform what we're really here to do, or what is possible to become next.
Yes. Yeah. The question I often ask myself is, Lola Wright, would you be willing to release the good to experience the greater good? It's like, if we don't let go of what was, there isn't space to create that which is forthcoming. So may I be willing to release the good to experience the greater good. And that requires faith because you can't yet see it.
Right. You can't yet see it. And we can't, that's on that macrocosmic level. And in the personal, we can't see it either. I mean, we can't see it in our own lives. When we want to hold on to what was, there's that part of the brain, that the amygdala that wants to keep us safe and wants to keep us with what is known. And anytime you go beyond what's apparently safe, what's apparently known, we run that risk. And there's that part of it that says, no way in whatever that you're going to do this.
That's right. And you know what? That part of our biology has served us.
It has. Yeah.
And it does serve us, right? It's just when it's our primary orientation, it often limits us.
Yeah. Because we are here to evolve. And that the world needs to evolve. And so what do you feel like is I don't want to say next exactly, but maybe I could ask it this way. What do you feel like is key to helping us move beyond the status quo into what is happening, or what is what we're on the throes of, or in the throes of, or maybe even on the toehold of a collective awakening?
My very favorite lyric is by Bob Marley from Redemption Song. And he says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. And what's so powerful about that as a context, and given what we have just moved through, particularly in the United States of America, but you can actually see this in basically every major political model around the world, is that the ways of outsourcing our good, our power, our authority to some figurehead is over. To me, that is the great gift of this most recent sort of toxic presidential political landscape, is if ever there was a wake-up call for human beings to realize no one is coming to save you. Like, this is it. There's no knight in shining armor. You're it, baby. You're it. And I think that that's really, like, in terms of evolution of the species. And to go back to the early part of this conversation, what do organizations and communities need to consider? How can you create models of leadership that don't require an outsourcing? Right? Like, so can I, for example, in the last chapter of Pema Chodron's book, The Places That Scare You, the last chapter of that book is called Spiritual Friend. And it is a powerful chapter around what it means to have an influential teacher in your life. But then all the ways that we project onto that teacher and absolve ourselves of responsibility and expect some unreasonable amount of perfection from them. Yes. And when human beings begin to realize that, like, hey, our humanity has its foibles, its strengths, its weaknesses, its shortcomings. And can we be okay with that? Eckhart Tolle says, the greatest source of grace known to humankind is acceptance of the unacceptable. And so it's like, I somehow all of that woven together makes sense to me. We are being brought to our knees. We can no longer absolve ourselves of personal responsibility. And that doesn't mean that we're indulging the ego. It means that we're actually realizing our agency, our authority, our capacity, our creativity. And when I come from wholeness versus woundedness and brokenness, when I come to know myself as this extraordinary and exquisite vessel of and for good, and then I know that that also lives in every person that I meet, then we can create contexts and frameworks for organizations and communities that involve leadership that doesn't require dominance.
Leadership that doesn't require dominance. Wow. I mean, that is such a powerful statement. Boy, I remember back in the early days of Wisdom Talk Radio a few years ago, the collective that we started Wisdom Talk Radio, did a program on radical responsibility. And it was really about that need to if we're going to change anything, if we're going to become conscious, we have to be responsible for all of what we create. And that doesn't mean blame. So you're not talking about blame at all. You're talking about empowerment, really. Yes, exactly. And that, to me, is so exciting. It is. Oh, it is. You have I can see almost in your eyes as I'm looking at you. I wish our audience could see you. This vision. It's like you embody this vision in such a powerful and beautiful way, Lola. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Wow. Can you speak to where people could find out more about you, get more of you? I want to keep going, but I know that we're running out of time. Well, I do appreciate this conversation, and I believe that we are always creating the reality that we desire. So I know that this conversation is magnetic, and I really appreciate you creating the space for it. So thank you. You are welcome. Yeah. So, please visit me at lolawright.com. I have a membership community that meets weekly, either on demand or live. It's called Our Circle. You can find out all about it on my website. We have people from literally all over the world who are committed to creating conscious community through personal transformation and collective awakening. I love social media, so find me on Instagram at Lola P. Wright. And finally, check out my my podcast, Find Your Fierce and Loving. I'd love to connect with your listeners too. Great. And I'll put all of those things into the show notes for sure. Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Lola Wright. And that's, by the way, Wright is WRIGHT. Just so you're just listening and you're not looking at any notes, LolaWright.com is with a W. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for creating this space. Avec plaisir, we say in French. With pleasure. Thank you. And thanks for being with us today at Wisdom Talk Radio. Join us here regularly for more wisdom, discovery, and illumination. Remember, you can find us on your favorite place to listen to podcasts. And of course, if you've enjoyed listening today, and how could you not have, leave us a review. That helps more people to access the wisdom and, as we've been talking about today, to transform the world. And for more about fast-tracking your ideas to creation and revenue, find me, Laurie Seymour, over at the BacaInstitute.com. That's B as in boy, ACA, Institute.com. Take the quiz and find out your creative innovator style so that you can turn your ideas into reality without missing another moment.
Thanks for joining us here at Wisdom Talk Radio. We wish you well in your conscious explorations. For more information and to join in the conversation, our website is wisdomtalkradio.com or at Wisdom Talk Radio on Facebook.